A lot of you PC gamers have been commenting about iBUYPOWER PCs, so we decided to purchase one of the best-selling models from Best Buy to give you a thorough breakdown and help you decide if they're actually a good buy. This is our 100% honest and unbiased review of the iBUYPOWER Y40. This configuration that we have here for you includes an i7-14700F CPU and 4070 GPU. I'm going to quickly take you through the unboxing and what's included, gaming and creator benchmarks, design and build quality, the internals, thermals, fan noise, overall ease of use, pricing breakdowns and comparing its price to performance ratios against the competition, and my overall top likes and dislikes. If you decide against this PC after anything that I say in this video, just keep watching because I'm also going to be showing you some alternative PCs that I recommend for every budget. I'll have links down below for all the products that I mentioned. I guarantee that by the end of this video, you will know if this PC is right for you or not. But if you still have any questions after watching this entire video, just shoot me a comment, and if you're publicly subscribed, I guarantee a personal response. Included with this build, we've got a Chimera KM7 RGB keyboard and mouse combo. Nothing special, but they are pretty comfortable to use, and the RGB looks pretty slick, especially in the dark. Then flipping the box over, another little bag fell out, which had a pretty thick power cable, a free gift bribing you to leave reviews, and then another little box with extra zip ties for any of your motherboard cables, and also some extra motherboard screws. Now getting into the design of this thing, this model was built with a mid-tower height Y40 case, which is overall very cohesive with its right angle lines and chamfered edges throughout. Its completely panoramic glass front corner is something that I've always really loved in PC cases. We've got 6 120mm fans total in this case, with one hidden intake on the bottom right next to our power supply, 2 more intakes on the side, and then 1 exhaust on the back and 2 more at the top. These 2 at the top are actually part of our all-in-one liquid cooling system for our CPU. For those of you new to this, the way this works is starting from this cooling block right here, the heat gets transferred using a liquid up through these tubes into a 120mm radiator just above these fans where the heat is spread out and then blown out the top. To the right of our CPU, we've got our T-Force Delta DDR5 RAM, 2 16GB sticks for a total of 32. Then underneath our CPU is our main drive that our operating system and everything else is installed on. This one is a Kingston NV2 2TB SSD. Our tests showed this one to have just okay speeds with about 3.8 megabytes per second read and 3.4 write. And then under that, the most expensive part of this PC and the most important part, our MSI GeForce RTX 4070 GPU. Nothing too special with the design on this one, but the silver around the fans does reflect the internal RGB in a subtle way, which complements the case really nicely. Within the design underneath our GPU, you can see there is a little bit of ventilation. I am a little curious as to why there's no ventilation directly above the fan that's inside there though. Then spinning around to the back, we've got another toolless panel that's easy to pop off. You can see on the back, only a small portion of this actually has ventilation. Kind of a waste of money in my opinion to have such a fancy high logo spiral design on something that you're never really going to look at. The only things that you can really do in here is add a couple more 2.5-inch drives or one 3.5-inch drive. And then down at the bottom right corner, our non-modular RAID Max 750 AE 750 watt PSU. Non-modular power supplies have cables wired directly into them, so if you ever have to replace your PSU, you're gonna have to rerun all of your cables. This cheaper PSU and cheap MSI Pro B760 VC Wi-Fi motherboard in this build are 2 of the main reasons that iBUYPOWER usually costs less than other pre-builds. It's not always an issue, but one of the most common problems that I've seen other people have with their iBUYPOWER PCs after heavy use is a cheap power supply that just dies on them. Replacing this one with a high quality one will run you a little over $100 later down the road. For the ports in the front, in the center, we've got a power button sandwiched between 2 USB-A ports, and on the far ends, a USB-C port and a headphone and microphone combo jack. On the back, 6 more USB-A ports, a PS2 port for older keyboards and mice, a 2.5G Ethernet, 1 more USB-C, connectors for your Wi-Fi antennas, and 6 audio ports. Then on the back of our 4070 GPU, 3 display ports and 1 HDMI. Now for the software, just like other pre-builds with MSI motherboards, you've got the MSI Center for adjusting your fan speeds, very detailed hardware monitoring, and Mystic Light for customizing your RGB animations. Quite a few animations in here, and believe it or or not, they actually work like they're supposed to. For those of you that want even further control within the BIOS, there's plenty of settings that you can fine tune as well if you're into overclocking and want to squeeze every last drop of performance out of your PC. As far as the fan noise goes, these were my results after testing each of the main fan profiles. In quiet mode, it was just a little over 42.5 decibels. And then when moving up to performance mode, it brought the fan noise up to about 43.5 decibels. One of the loudest quiet modes when the computer is idle and doing nothing, but honestly pretty average when it comes to extreme gaming and performance mode. Now for the thermals, you can see in our thermal imaging time-lapse from computer off to full-on gaming that just like most gaming PCs, we get a lot of heat coming out of the side of the GPU. Usually that just builds up against the glass, but after removing the glass panel, you can see that this vertical mounted GPU actually holds a lot of heat underneath it. And because there's no heat sink on the SSD above the GPU, that also gets pretty hot. And I'd say that this pre-built cooling does an okay job getting rid of that heat using the back and top exhaust fans. The large majority of my thermal testing was spent in actual gameplay though. These were our CPU temps for several different games at 1080p. You can see that compared to other similar spec pre-builts that these temperatures were a bit higher than average. And then averaging all 1080p gaming temperatures data together on the last 35 PCs, this gives us an even better overall perspective on how this stands up against the competition. And this only confirmed it to be hotter than the other similar spec pre-builts with i7s and 4070 GPUs. It was significantly cooler than that iBUYPOWER slate mesh that we reviewed a while ago though. Then jumping into 4K gaming, we organized this chart by the GPU because high resolution gaming puts more pressure on the GPU and less on the CPU. Here you can see that this GPU did get pretty hot, especially when you compare it to all of these other top tier PCs with GPUs that push a lot more power. Now for the performance and gaming benchmarks. And up next, the most important part of this review, the price to performance ratios. For Cinebench R23, which simulates its 3D rendering power, we got a multi-core score of 21,089 and a single core score of 2,075. All rendering software can utilize multiple cores, so that's the most important score here. This was one of the lowest scores that we've seen for a PC with an i7 CPU. Not the best choice for 3D rendering. Another very helpful test for you 3D renderers is the V-Ray benchmark. And these were our CUDA, RTX, and overall V-Ray performance scores. These GPU scores were about where I'd expect them to be for a 4070 pre-built. This is an important score if you're doing a lot of high polygon 3D modeling or real-time viewport rendering and lighting. The overall V-Ray performance score though is a CPU-based rendering test that demonstrates how well a PC can handle the more advanced realistic rendering that takes a lot longer to calculate. And this V-Ray performance chart confirmed that again the CPU in this pre-built is not performing where it should be for 14th Gen i7. And if you needed any more convincing for those of you who use Blender, we got some pretty low rendering scores for the GPU and CPU here as well. And then the last set of benchmarks for creatives before we get into gaming are the Puget Benchmarks. For DaVinci Resolve, we got 2503. For the price of this pre-built, I'd say it did pretty well here compared to the others. Adobe Premiere, 10,193. Now this looks low, but this is also the lowest spec PC that I've tested since Puget completely changed the way this test works. In Photoshop, it also performed pretty well for these specs, and with 32 gigabytes of RAM, you're not going to have any issues even with the largest PSD files with a lot of layers. For 3D Mark, which is a great benchmark used to predict a computer's overall gameability, we plugged in these overall graphic and CPU scores into our master chart, and you can see here that it performed about where you'd expect it to be. Actual gaming benchmarks are likely what you guys care the most about though. We took the many hours of testing from those games and averaged the FPS against the competition, and you can see here that it actually held its own pretty well against other similar spec gaming pre-builts. And then averaging all of those games together, this gave us an even broader overall perspective on how this PC stands against the rest. 208 FPS at the highest graphics settings, that's not too bad for this configuration. And then in our 1440p tests, we got about a 23% drop in FPS. Our overall average was about 160 FPS here, still doing better than what that similar spec R16 could do. And then checking out the FPS for each individual game at this resolution, you can see that the only game that we did not break at least 100 is Cyberpunk. In 4K, our average FPS dropped an additional 44% with an average of 89 FPS. And then breaking it down game by game, this reveals how big of a difference a 4070 versus a 4070 Ti does at higher resolutions. Still above 60 FPS with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, but barely 30 with Cyberpunk. You're gonna have to pull the graphic presets down quite a bit for that one if you want 4K. Now for the price to performance ratios. Right now at the time of this recording, this PC will cost you $1,600. $100 less than what I got it for. This is a great deal for a PC with these specs, and as you can see here, we've got a new chart topper with the best 1080p 1080p gaming price to performance ratio of all the PCs that I've ever reviewed. Even jumping up into 1440p gaming, it still held its place in first. But because this PC struggled to perform well at 4K, it fell to 5th place at that resolution. And because of the current deals going on with the Alienware Aurora R16 and its high performance, both configurations that I've tested have stolen first and second for the best dollar per FPS ratios at 4K. Now, if you're at an entirely different price point, these are my recommendations for every budget. I'll have links down below for all the computers that I mentioned. If $1,600 for this PC is too much for you and you need to be closer to $1,000, then I would go with this CyberPower PC Gamer Extreme with an i5 and 4060. If $1,000 is still too much, then I would get this exact version of the Victus by HP 15L that I reviewed with a 1660 Super and i5 for just a little over $600. That's the bare minimum that I would recommend for semi-decent low graphics settings. Now, if you're coming from a console like an Xbox Series X or a PS5 and you want your graphics to at least match that, then you're going to need a PC with at least a 3060 or in this case a 4060 GPU, which then you'll need to bump up the PSU to a 500 watt PSU and then also bump up your RAM to 16 gigabytes, and this will bring the price of this one to over $800. If you can actually afford more than this iBUYPOWER PC, then I recommend this Skytech Azure 2 with an i7 and 4070 Ti for just over $2,000. The one that I reviewed had an i5 and it performed really well. This one will be about 5% faster than that one. If you can afford more than that, then I would go with this configuration of the CyberPower PC Gamer Supreme with an i7 and 4080 Super for $2,270. This is basically the same specs as that Corsair Vengeance i7 500 that we reviewed, but a lot cheaper. I do prefer the Corsair version, but if you can't afford Corsairs, then that's a pretty good option. Corsair pre-builts are better quality though, and you do get a 2-year warranty versus the 1 year from pretty much everybody else. And above that, at just over $3,200, the Alienware Aurora R16 is actually a pretty good deal. I would get this one if and only if you don't plan to be doing any upgrading. Proprietary Alienware PCs are only really for those that find modding their PC to be a chore and just toss their PC for a completely new one every few years. And if you're an absolute baller, your best bet for quality, longevity, upgradability, and performance, the Corsair Vengeance i7 500. This one has been the most purchased top-tier PC by my viewers and 3rd most purchased overall. Overall, this is currently one of the best deals for a pre-built PC with these specs. It doesn't have the best motherboard or power supply, but you kind of get what you pay for. If you think you're going to be pushing this PC hard for several hours a day, I predict the power supply to only really last a couple years. Not a huge deal to spend maybe $100 replacing it with a new one later on though. Most likely in 2 years, you're going to get the itch to upgrade things anyways. If you do decide to purchase this PC or any of the others that I mentioned, then please remember to use my affiliate links in the comments and description below, as I get a small commission at no cost to you for every single purchase made. And it's actually a major factor in keeping this channel going and getting better and better for you. I'd also like to personally thank all of my members for their monthly support of this channel. Also, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe with notifications turned on to stay up to date with all of my latest tech and gaming PCs. Thanks for watching, guys. I love you guys. God bless.